You ever hear of a wild dog who chose love over survival? Stay with us. This isn't just a story about animals, it's a story about promises kept in silence and a father who never walked away. Before we begin, if stories of courage, connection, and quiet miracles move you, gently tap that like button, subscribe, and stay till the end. You won't forget this one. The snow in Timber Hollow was different this winter, quieter, heavier, almost reluctant to fall, as if the sky itself held onto it until the last possible moment. It blanketed the pines and bent the bare shoulders of trees, muffling every sound but the slow crunch of boots on the trail. Emily Carver and Ben Holloway had been hiking for nearly 3 hours through the southern edge of Blackleaf National Forest, a remote stretch of land hugging the icy bend of Willow Creek. The sky was pale gray, the kind that made noon look like dusk, and the scent of pine mixed with the sharp bite of wind on the nose. Emily, 23, had the kind of beauty that wasn't obvious at first glance: freckled skin, short chestnut hair tucked under a wool beanie, and sharp, observant eyes the color of old leaves. She walked with quiet determination, not the type to talk unless something needed saying. Her professors at the University of Missoula often said she had a gift with animals, a kind of stillness that made even the skittish birds stay perched on a branch when she passed. But that calm came with weight. When Emily was 12, her golden retriever, Max, had gone missing during a blizzard. The dog was never found, and though no one said it out loud, everyone suspected the worst. Since then, Emily had learned to protect her heart by never holding anything too tightly. Ben was her classmate and closest friend, though almost everything about him contrasted her. He was tall and lanky, with a mop of curly blonde hair that refused to stay beneath his hood, and an easy grin that came too quickly, even when he was nervous. Ben filled silences the way some people filled rooms, with nervous jokes, half-baked theories, or out-loud questions that sounded like thoughts escaping before he could catch them. Yet his loyalty was steadfast, and his admiration for Emily was visible in every sideways glance. They were both part of the university's winter field monitoring project tracking wildlife movement via camera traps scattered across rarely accessed parts of the forest. The route today had taken them to a spot few hikers ever visited, especially this late in the season. As they neared a bend in the creek, Emily slowed to a halt. "What's that?" she said, pointing across the frozen embankment. Ben squinted through the fog of his breath. About 30 feet ahead, half covered in snow, lay a massive, unmoving form at first glance, nothing more than a dark mound beside the icy creek. But something about its stillness, the shape, made Emily uneasy. She raised her binoculars. Her body stiffened. "It's a dog," she murmured. "A big one." Ben stepped forward, slipping a little on the frost. "Like a stray?" "No," she said, lowering the binoculars. "Like a wolf." "But it's not." The two moved carefully, boots crunching on frozen grass, until they stood just 20 feet from the creature. Up close, the details emerged with sobering clarity. It was a German shepherd, though, far larger than any domestic one Emily had ever seen. Its coat was matted and dark, dusted with frost. Deep scars ran across its flanks and muzzle, a map of battles fought and survived. Its eyes were half-lidded but open, watching them silently. Its breath came in shallow plumes, slow and labored. Ben took a step closer. "Wait," Emily whispered, grabbing his sleeve. "Look, under him." The dog, though massive and clearly exhausted, was not lying on the ground entirely. Its body was curved slightly, chest low to the earth, as if sheltering something. Emily circled carefully to one side, crouching low. Her breath caught. Nestled beneath the thick fur of the shepherd's belly were two tiny forms, barely visible under the layers of snow and fur. Puppies. Their coats were lighter, one a pale tan, the other closer to gray. They were trembling, pressed into the warmth of the larger dog's body. "My God," Ben muttered. "They're alive?" "Barely," Emily said. "He's protecting them." Ben turned pale. "We need to call someone." Emily nodded. "Get the sat phone. Call the Timber Hollow Wildlife Center. Ask for Dr. Marcus Reeve. He's the only one who'll get out here fast enough." As Ben scrambled for the radio pack, Emily remained crouched just outside the radius of the dog's reach. She knew better than to underestimate a cornered animal, especially one in pain. Yet the shepherd didn't snarl, didn't even shift. Its eyes stayed on her, flickering with something, not quite fear, but something far older, Resignation, maybe, or trust? The wind picked up, sending snow dust spiraling into the trees. Emily pulled her coat tighter and watched the dog's chest rise and fall. Despite the pain etched into every line of his body, the massive animal kept his limbs around the puppy's, creating a pocket of warmth with his own failing strength. She didn't speak. She simply sat there beside him, the girl who had once lost her dog to the winter, now staring into the eyes of one that had fought it to protect others. An hour passed before the rescue team arrived, 2 rangers and a field vet. But in that hour, Emily didn't move. Neither did the shepherd. Snow gathered gently on his back, and the pups whimpered once in their sleep, but the dog didn't react. He stayed, silent and still. Just as the vet approached with a sedative dart, Ben knelt beside Emily. "Why do you think he did it?" he whispered. She didn't take her eyes off the shepherd. "Because someone once did it for him." By the time the rescue truck pulled up along the icy trailhead, night had begun creeping through the branches, wrapping the forest in a quiet silver stillness. Headlamps cut through the falling snow, casting long, spectral shadows across the clearing where Emily and Ben waited. The wind had died down, but the cold deepened, making even the breath from their lips drift sluggishly into the air, like mist reluctant to leave. The first to step out was Dr. Marcus Reeve. At 58, Marcus had the bearing of someone who had once stood tall in uniform and still hadn't quite learned how to stand any other way. He was lean, with weathered skin, close-cropped steel-gray hair, and a jaw clenched like a man used to bracing for news that didn't come gently. His brown eyes held a constant weight, not from age, but from memory. Marcus had served 12 years in the Army as a field medic before changing paths and studying veterinary medicine. He rarely spoke about his son, Daniel, a young man who had died in a mountaineering accident 3 winters prior. Since then, Marcus had spent most of his time tending to animals in silence, as though stitching up broken creatures could help him piece together something lost within himself. Following him were Ranger Tally and Officer June Delaney. Tally was broad-shouldered, with ruddy cheeks and a booming voice that usually filled the room before he did. Tonight, though, he spoke in hushed tones, the gravity of the call already in his stance. June, in contrast, was compact and alert, no more than 5'3", with curly dark hair tucked under a thermal cap. Her hands moved quickly, but her eyes took in everything slowly. She had a reputation for sensing when an animal was going to bolt a full second before it did. Emily stood as they approached. Her legs were numb, but her voice was steady. "He's not aggressive," she said. "He didn't move, but there are 2 puppies under him, still breathing, I think." Marcus didn't speak. He knelt beside the massive dog, his movements calm, deliberate. He didn't touch him at first, just watched, listened, knelt close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from the thick matted coat. The German shepherd didn't lift his head, but his ears twitched faintly at the shift in presence. "He's hurt," Marcus finally murmured. "Maybe more than we think. But he's focused on them." Gently, Marcus reached under the dog's belly, fingertips brushing against something small and shivering. He inhaled sharply. "Puppies," he said quietly. 2. Underweight, hypothermic. He's curled around them like insulation. Ben stepped closer, breath visible in the cold. "Is that normal? I mean, for a male dog, a wild one?" "No," Marcus said flatly. "Not at all." He moved carefully, motioning June to prepare a warming crate, while Tally readied the tranquilizer. Emily watched the dog's flanks rise and fall. His breathing was shallow, but his gaze never left Marcus. Marcus hesitated. "You've done your job, big guy," he whispered. "Let us help you now." The dart struck softly in the shoulder. The shepherd let out a low grunt, not of pain but of exhaustion. As the sedative began to take effect, his massive body eased, just enough for Marcus to slip an arm underneath and cradle the first puppy. It was heartbreakingly light. Pale tan with patches of gray, eyes closed, limbs trembling. Marcus pressed it gently against his chest as June retrieved the second, a smaller pup, darker, barely responsive. Marcus handed them off to the rangers and returned his attention to the adult dog. His fur was tangled with burrs, crusted with blood near one hind leg, and along his ribcage were old scars, some healed, others fresh. One ear was torn, his paws were cracked from rough terrain and exposure. But even sedated, the shepherd's head turned slightly toward where the pups had been taken, his body twitching to move. He's still trying to guard them, Marcus said, almost to himself. Then he paused, eyes narrowing. There was something in the shape of the dog's face, the depth of the chest, a distinct notch above his left eye. It couldn't be. But the resemblance was there, clear as day. Marcus stood slowly, as though steadying himself against something rising from deep inside. Emily noticed. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. "Years ago," he began, voice low, "my son had a dog just like this. Shepherd named Arlo, same eyes, same markings. He used to run through the hills like a storm, and always came back muddy, proud as hell. After Daniel died, I never found the dog. He ran off the night we brought the news. I searched, for months." Ben looked between Marcus and the shepherd, disbelief stirring behind his eyes. "You think this could be him?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, Arlo would be older by now. This one's probably 5, maybe 6. But he looks like he could be his son." He knelt again, gloved hand brushing snow off the dog's fur. "I know it sounds crazy," he added, "but sometimes it's like grief leaves behind echoes." They worked quickly after that. The pups were wrapped in fleece and placed in the heated crate inside the truck. The adult shepherd was lifted gently onto a stretcher, his limp form heavier than expected. Emily rode in the back with the puppies, cradling them close as they mewed softly in their sleep. As the truck rumbled down the snow-covered road toward Timber Hollow Wildlife Center, Marcus sat silently in the passenger seat, one hand resting on the edge of the stretcher. In the rearview mirror, June caught his eyes. "You okay, Doc?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I think he might have saved me as much as he saved them." The snow had quieted overnight, replaced by a thin veil of frost that coated every window at Timber Hollow Wildlife Center. Inside, the heat hummed low and steady, casting a soft glow over the recovery wing. The adult German shepherd lay sedated on a reinforced table under a canopy of warm light. His breathing was shallow but even, his chest rising in slow rhythm. The fresh bandages along his flank were clean, stitched with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times and still never rushed. Dr. Marcus Reeves stood nearby, arms crossed, staring through the observation glass with a stillness that mirrored the dog's. He hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled beneath his lab coat, and dark half-moons sat beneath his eyes. But he couldn't leave yet. Not until he was sure. Not until the question inside him had an answer. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. Emily stepped in, holding a small clipboard, her cheeks pink from the cold outside. She had barely left the puppy's side all night. They were now tucked safely in a heated enclosure in the nursery wing, curled together beneath layers of blankets. "I have something," she said, holding up the clipboard. One of the rangers pulled the chip data. Marcus turned to her, and for a moment there was a flicker of something sharp and vulnerable behind his eyes. "It's him," she continued. "His name's in the registry. Ranger, microchipped 7 years ago by Forestry Rescue Division. Assigned to Station 14 out in Flathead County." Marcus took the clipboard slowly. A photo had been printed in the top corner, old, a bit pixelated, but unmistakable. The same sharply angled jawline, the same rich sable coat, the same half-moon scar just above the left brow. He exhaled, the air catching in his throat. "Ranger?" he murmured. "Of course." Emily watched him, gently but without intrusion. "You knew him?" Marcus nodded. "Not directly, but I worked with a lot of the Forestry Division after I left the military. They partnered with working dogs canines trained in search and rescue, fire zone recovery, avalanche work. Ranger was paired with another shepherd, female, name was Maya. They were inseparable." He stepped closer to the observation window, his hand resting lightly on the frame. 3 years ago, there was a fire up in Granite Ridge. Took out half the station. Some of the crew made it out. Maya didn't. They said Ranger tried to pull her free, even when the flames came down around them. He disappeared into the smoke. No one ever found him. Emily's eyes dropped. Until now. They stood in silence for a while, the weight of that history filling the room like smoke from a memory that hadn't finished burning. In the nursery wing, the puppies stirred. One, a slightly larger male with a tan coat, was already showing signs of strength, his small tail twitching as he nuzzled against the warmth. The other, smaller and darker, was still weak, her tiny chest rising just barely. Emily had taken to sitting near their pen with a notebook in hand, not for science, for something more personal. She wrote in long, looping script, her handwriting soft and deliberate. Day 1. Ranger didn't just survive the fire. He carried something out of it, carried them, the puppies, maybe his, maybe hers. Maybe it doesn't matter. He chose to stay, he chose to return, and something in me understands why. She didn't tell Marcus she had started writing, not yet, but each night she filled another page. Later that afternoon, Marcus was joined by someone unexpected, Nina Caldwell, a wildlife biologist in her early 40s, brought in by the Center for Special Cases. She was tall and willowy, with silver-streaked auburn hair tied back in a braid, and the kind of presence that filled a room without raising her voice. Nina had once spent 5 years tracking wolves in Yellowstone, and though she was soft-spoken, she was known for catching every detail most people missed. She greeted Marcus with a nod. "I read the report. You think he's been in the wild since the fire?" "More than that," Marcus said. "He's been surviving, maybe even searching." Nina stepped up to the window, her eyes scanning Ranger's scars, the way his muscles had overcompensated on one side. "He fought something, more than once. The fracture on his front leg. That didn't come from a fall. That's a blunt force impact. Large predator or man-made?" Marcus sighed. "So he didn't just wander out of the forest. He carved a path back. And not for himself," Nina added. "For them." She turned back to Marcus. "If the female pup survives, we'll run her DNA against Maya's registry. There's a good chance they're her offspring. And Ranger, he's already lived 2 lifetimes more than most." That evening, Emily returned to the nursery and opened her notebook again. The larger puppy had begun to play, just barely, batting at her finger with a wobbly paw. The smaller one still hadn't opened her eyes, but she was breathing. Emily touched the page lightly, then added, "They say some dogs are born for service. Others are born wild. But maybe there's a third kind, the ones who choose their purpose long after they've been broken. Ranger chose to be a father, even when the world told him it wasn't his place." Across the hall, Ranger stirred. He didn't open his eyes, but his ears twitched. As the light in the center dimmed and the snow began to fall again outside, a quiet understanding settled in the space between each breath. The past was still burning somewhere out there in the trees, but inside these walls, something else had begun, something that might, just might, survive the winter. It was well past midnight when the silence broke. The Timber Hollow Wildlife Center was cloaked in its usual winter hush heaters, humming low, snow brushing lightly against the skylights, and the occasional shuffle of paws or whisper of breath from recovering animals in the infirmary. Most of the staff had gone home. Only the night nurse remained, dozing behind the reception counter, and Emily curled into a wool blanket in the observation wing, with her notebook resting open on her lap. In the recovery chamber, under a canopy of soft red heat lamps, Ranger stirred. For the past 2 days, the shepherd had lain still, breathing but distant, like a soul half between worlds. His wounds had been cleaned, his muscles hydrated by slow drips, his body wrapped in warmth and rest. But his mind, his instincts had not returned. Marcus said it was common. "Sometimes," he'd said, "they come back slower than the body does." Tonight, however, something shifted. Ranger's ears twitched first, then his nose flared, drawing in the scent of something far away but familiar. His eyes cracked open. The left one blinked several times as if trying to focus. The right stayed half closed beneath a faint scar. Then his head lifted not quickly, but with purpose. His body trembled as he tried to rise. The muscles in his legs, weak from sedation, flexed in rebellion. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Not anger, not pain. Something else. Urgency. Across the glass wall of the observation room, Emily sat up sharply. "Ranger," she whispered, setting the notebook aside and stepping toward the barrier. The dog managed to prop himself onto his elbows, claws scraping softly on the padded table. His head turned slowly until his eyes met hers, but they didn't linger. Instead, he looked past her, through the far door, toward the nursery. Emily froze. The nursery, the puppies. Seconds later, Ranger's chest swelled. What came next was not a bark nor a snarl, but a sound that didn't belong in a clinical facility, low and haunting, drawn from something deeper than muscle or memory. It was a call, not wild, not desperate, but laced with a quiet ache, as if a father calling into the night for his children, with the last of what strength he had. In the nursery, the pups stirred. The larger one lifted his head first, ears twitching. He whimpered once, a high, confused sound, then struggled to his paws. The smaller one followed, still shaky, barely balanced, but awake. They toddled toward the edge of the heated crate, then pressed their tiny noses against the plexiglass wall, staring into the hallway. Emily moved quickly. She called Marcus, even though she knew he wouldn't be asleep. He rarely was these days. He arrived 15 minutes later, wearing the same coat he had the day of the rescue. His face was lined with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from too much remembering. "I heard it," he said before Emily even spoke. "He's awake?" "He's trying to get to them," she said, "and they're trying to get to him." They stood in silence for a beat longer than necessary. Then Emily added gently, "I know the policy, but maybe this time we don't follow it." Marcus's lips tightened. For years, the center had maintained strict boundaries. No direct contact between adult rescues and neonates, unless medically cleared and under supervision. There were too many risks: infection, rejection, trauma. But this wasn't protocol. This was a family. "We'll need an enclosure," he said finally. "Secure, temperature controlled. They can't be alone together, not yet, but close, visible, audible, smell too." "I'll get the techs," Emily said, already moving. By noon the next day, the side yard of the center had been transformed. A glass-paneled enclosure, connected by heated ducts, was built in the snow-covered rear garden, flanked by pine logs and padded bedding. A movable divider kept the pups and Ranger physically apart, but within scent and sight. Staff called it the reunion room. That evening, Ranger was wheeled into the pen on a reinforced cart. He was stronger now standing, if only briefly, and his eyes darted to every corner of the space, pausing only when the gate slid open and the crate carrying the pups was brought in. They saw each other at once. The larger puppy yelped and scrambled forward, tail wagging in clumsy joy. The smaller one paused, blinking, then let out a soft, gravelly whine, waddling to catch up. The moment they reached the divider, they pressed themselves against it, paws up, noses against the glass, eyes wide and shining. Ranger stood. He wobbled, his legs still unsure, but he walked one slow step, then another, until his muzzle rested against the divider. His breath fogged the glass. The puppies mirrored him. He let out a low rumble, almost like a purr. The pups responded in kind, pawing gently, whining, tails thumping. From the viewing station above, Marcus watched. He said nothing, but his hands, always steady, trembled slightly at his sides. In the control room, Sarah Jennings, one of the senior technicians, watched the vitals. Sarah was in her late 40s, short and wiry with calloused fingers and a surprisingly melodic voice. She had been a vet nurse for over 20 years and had seen her share of wild reunions. But this one, she later told Emily, made her believe in something again. That night, Ranger curled near the glass divider. The puppies fell asleep pressed on the other side, their breathing synchronized with his. Emily returned to her notebook. He called, and they came. Not because he commanded it, but because they knew his voice. Somewhere deep in their marrow, they remembered. And now, against policy, against caution, they rest, together, divided only by what humans still fear. Marcus lingered near the observation deck, long after the lights dimmed. "Do you think they really remember him?" Emily asked quietly. He nodded. "They don't have to remember. They just have to know." The morning came quietly, with snow falling like ash from a sky the color of pewter. The light at Timber Hollow Wildlife Center was soft, diffused through the frost-bitten windows and settling over the white fields, like a blanket meant not to warm, but to hush. In the back of the facility, the new enclosure stood ready, a wide pen lined with pine logs and insulated stone, open to the sky but protected from wind. A soft glow heat lamp suspended over the center. Ranger had spent the last 3 days growing stronger, his gait steadier, his eyes clearer. The two pups had thrived in the same time, though in different ways. The larger one, now nicknamed Birch for the faint white streak on his forehead, had begun bounding along the walls of the nursery with bursts of enthusiasm that left his legs tangled beneath him. The smaller one, whom Emily had quietly named Wren, remained quieter, more cautious. But she had finally opened her eyes wide and dark, pools of quiet observation that seemed to study the world rather than stumble through it. That morning, the decision was made. The glass divider was to come down. Marcus signed off on the moment himself, after checking Ranger's vitals and confirming the pups were clear of infection. He said nothing as the gate was unlatched. Instead, he stood back, arms folded, eyes fixed on the door to the yard. Emily was already outside, bundled in her navy parka, holding a small camera in one gloved hand and her worn leather notebook in the other. Her breath hung in the air, short and shallow. She had barely slept, her dreams cluttered with fragments of the reunion she was about to witness. But none could compare to the real thing. Sarah Jennings was also present, the senior technician watching from inside the control room. She had been the one to suggest the snow stay. "It softens everything," she'd said the day before. "Maybe they remember snow." Sarah's voice was always gentle, even when tired, and she moved like someone who had learned, long ago, to approach life like she approached scared animals, slowly, kindly, without assumption. The gates opened just as a new flurry began to drift downward. The two puppies were released first. Birch sprinted forward, tumbling into the snowbank like a child discovering joy. Wren followed slowly, her small frame nearly vanishing in the powdery layer. Her ears perked, and she lifted her nose to the wind. Then Ranger stepped out. He didn't run. He walked. With each step, snow crunched beneath his paws, his muscles shifting beneath his winter-thickened coat. The faintest limp still clung to his left side, but there was strength in the way he moved, like someone walking toward a purpose long awaited. The moment he came into view, Birch yelped, turning mid-bound and tumbling back toward him. Wren froze, then padded forward, her eyes locked on the towering figure that smelled like safety and memory. Ranger stopped a few feet away, head lowered slightly, breath misting through the frigid air. He didn't make a sound. Birch reached him first, nuzzling hard against Ranger's foreleg. The shepherd stood still, then lowered his head and gently bumped the pup with his snout. Wren came next, slower, but as soon as she touched her father's chest, she collapsed into him. He curled around them without hesitation. Not one word was spoken. From the control room, Sarah reached for the intercom, but didn't press the button. She simply watched. Marcus, standing at the edge of the pen, didn't blink. Emily stood frozen, pen poised over her notebook, the camera dangling at her side. They watched as Ranger settled, his body wrapping around both puppies in a half-moon arc. His breathing was calm, deep, even. The pups wriggled against him, then fell still. Snow dusted over all three, frosting their coats, the ground, their shapes, as if the forest itself had paused to exhale. Emily finally lifted her pen. They are one now. Not just in blood, but in breath. 3 lives that had no promise of crossing paths again. But they did. And under falling snow, their reunion wrote a language older than any word I know. From the main building, a figure appeared at the tree line. He walked slowly, leaning slightly on a wooden cane. He wore an old green parka patched at the elbows, and a wool cap pulled low over graying hair. His name was Thomas Reddick, though few people called him that anymore. Most knew him simply as Tom, or not at all. He had lived alone on the outskirts of Timber Hollow since retiring from the Forest Fire Service 10 years ago. Tall, broad-shouldered, with deep lines etched into his face like riverbeds through stone, Thomas had the bearing of someone who had survived too much fire. His right hand, once injured in a helicopter drop gone wrong, now trembled when cold. He never married, never stayed in town long. But when he heard that a dog named Ranger had been found alive, sheltering pups in the snow, he had walked 5 miles to see for himself. Marcus noticed him first and approached slowly. "You knew him?" Marcus asked. Thomas nodded, eyes still fixed on the pen. "I trained him," he said simply. "Ranger and Maya, back in Flathead. He was the best we had, smart, brave, wouldn't leave a burning trail until every living thing was accounted for." He looked down. "When we lost Maya, we figured he'd gone too. Never thought he'd survive." "He didn't just survive," Marcus said quietly. "He returned, with something more." They stood side by side, watching as the trio lay nestled in snow, unmoving but very much alive. Thomas exhaled deeply. "Guess he still knows how to find his way through the smoke." The snow lingered longer than expected that year. March crept in quietly, with more gray than green, and while the first crocuses remained hidden beneath hardened earth, inside Timber Hollow Wildlife Center, spring had already begun its strange and sorrowful bloom. Ranger lay in the center of the outdoor enclosure, flanked on either side by Birch and Wren, who now napped with the utter trust of those who had never known abandonment. Their tiny bodies rose and fell gently against his ribcage, their warmth sinking into his fur. From a distance, he looked peaceful, his breath steady, his posture calm. But Marcus, who monitored his charts every morning without fail, knew better. The shepherd's strength had not returned as it should have. His gait was slower each day. A persistent tremor in his back legs had started to manifest, subtle but consistent. When he lay down, it took longer to rise again. His appetite waned, his eyes dulled, not from age, but from a fatigue that had sunk beneath the skin and reached marrow. A full physical was ordered. Dr. Nina Caldwell called back to consult. Performed the scan alongside Marcus. Nina, tall and composed as ever, stood with arms folded in the dimly lit lab, her expression carved from quiet concern. She hadn't changed her no-nonsense tone, nor her habit of keeping her emotions tucked beneath clinical logic. But even she took a longer pause before speaking that morning. Pulmonary scarring, likely from inhalation during the fire years ago, she said. Worse now, fibrosis. Marcus nodded grimly. And the leg. Old fracture, rebroken at some point. Maybe during a fight in the wild. It healed wrong, he's compensating, but not for long. And there's more. She glanced at the imaging screen again, her fingers tapping the console. Heart's enlarged, stress-induced cardiomyopathy. His body's been running on instinct and memory. But now that his mission's over, she didn't finish. Marcus stepped back from the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost to himself, he kept going just to get them here. Outside, snow drifted lazily over the yard where the pups played. Ranger remained curled by the stump, watching them with heavy eyes. That evening, Thomas Reddick returned. He didn't say much as usual. His face was ruddy from wind, his parka dusted in frost. But when Marcus handed him the medical report, the old man took it without a word and sat with it for nearly an hour in the observation lounge. Later, he stepped into the staff meeting uninvited, cleared his throat, and said only one thing. I want to build him something that lasts. Marcus looked up. What do you mean? Thomas shifted his cane from hand to hand. Not a shelter, not a monument, a place for dogs like him. Dogs that weren't meant to be pets or prisoners or forgotten. Somewhere in these woods. Somewhere he would have gone, if he had the choice. Emily, who had been quietly sketching the pups beside the heater, sat straighter. A sanctuary? She asked. Thomas nodded. A haven. He met Marcus's eyes. We'll call it the Haven of Ranger. It started that week, with donations from local wildlife foundations and land permissions signed by Timber Hollow's town council, who, to their credit, had watched the story of Ranger unfold like everyone else, and town plans for a rehabilitation preserve took shape. An open expanse of forest, fenced but natural, with controlled feeding zones, medical outposts, and caretakers trained not to train, but to trust. It wouldn't be for every dog, only for the wild ones, the strays too smart for kennels and too wounded for rehoming. Emily volunteered to help design the interior quarters. She drafted blueprints between shifts, placing wide-open runs beside hollowed stumps, digging spots near heated dens. In her journal, she wrote, He wasn't just saving his children. He was showing us something we'd forgotten, what it means to protect without possession. He didn't want a home. He wanted a purpose. The days passed slowly. Ranger grew quieter. He still followed the pups, still curled his body around them at night. But more often now, he watched from the edge of the yard, his eyes tracing the tree line as though remembering a path he had once taken and might have to take again. One afternoon, as the sun finally broke through the clouds and painted the snow with gold, Wren began her first playful bark. It was small, high-pitched, clumsy. Birch joined in moments later, leaping forward with energy that made his paws slide across the icy patch. They circled Ranger, biting at his ears, nudging his neck, begging for attention. And for a while, he gave it. He stood, he trotted, he even growled playfully, sending the pups tumbling backward in glee. Emily watched from the fence, notebook in hand, a single tear clinging to her cheek. Behind her, Sarah Jennings approached. He's holding on for them. Emily nodded. But they're starting to stand on their own. The sky that evening was painted in bruised purples and weary golds, as if the day itself knew it was preparing to say goodbye. The snow had softened into slush, the wind calmed to a sigh, and the forest surrounding Timber Hollow Wildlife Center stood utterly still, bare branches swaying like tired fingers, waving one final farewell. Inside the main wing, the staff moved quietly. Conversations were hushed, movements slow, as though any sudden noise might disturb a sacred moment not yet fully formed. Ranger lay on a thick fleece bedding inside the special enclosure, no longer in the open yard. His breathing had grown shallow, his body barely responding even to Birch's playful nudge or Wren's gentle nuzzle. Dr. Marcus Reeve had spent most of the day by his side. He said little, but his hands spoke in steadiness, the way he checked Ranger's heartbeat every hour, adjusted the blankets, or warmed broth on a portable stove that he knew the old shepherd would no longer drink. Ranger no longer barked. He hadn't for days. But his eyes still found his children. And when they curled against his ribcage, his chest would rise with a little more conviction, his ears twitch ever so slightly toward them. That evening, Marcus called an impromptu meeting in the observation room. Emily, Sarah Jennings, Nina Caldwell, and two of the vet techs gathered around the long table. "I think we should let them stay with him tonight," Marcus said. His voice was low but certain. Sarah, tall and bony as ever, in her wool turtleneck and flannel-lined pants, gave a slow nod. "It's time." Nina crossed her arms. Her scientific objectivity had served them well, but even she couldn't deny the inevitable. "We'll monitor vitals, keep a camera running, but yes, let them sleep beside him." No one objected, and so the plan was quietly set into motion. Emily, now more than a note-taker, more than an observer, stayed behind after the meeting. Her eyes were red-rimmed but focused. She had finished the final paragraph of her article the night before, a story that began with a broken shepherd in the snow and ended with two lives that bloomed from beneath his ribs. She titled it "The Watcher of Willow Creek." In her heart, she hadn't written it for the public. She had written it for herself, for Max, the dog she'd lost long ago in a storm not unlike this one, for Ranger, for everyone who ever needed proof that real love does not require words or walls. It simply stays. As twilight deepened, the enclosure was prepared. Ranger was moved gently to a quieter space in the rear wing, a small, dimly lit den with pine-scented bedding and heat stones lining the walls. The pups were released into the space with him. Birch, bold as ever, bounded up immediately and curled into Ranger's chest with the unhesitating comfort of someone who had never known rejection. Wren was slower, more delicate. She sniffed Ranger's paw, then his ear, then pressed her forehead into the hollow beneath his jaw and stayed there. Ranger didn't move much, but his tail twitched once. A soft grunt escaped his chest, and his head, heavy with exhaustion, lowered until it rested against the top of Wren's small shoulder. Outside the room, Emily watched through the glass window, notebook in hand. Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed. For a long while, they said nothing. "You know," Marcus murmured, "I've stitched wounds that span 20 inches. I've pulled animals from burning barns, from frozen rivers. I thought I understood courage." Emily turned to him. "And now?" He blinked slowly. "Now, I know I never did." Inside, the pups had fallen asleep. Ranger's breathing had grown slower, but still rhythmic. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the heater and the sound of 3 synchronized heartbeats. At dawn, the sky turned the color of raw peach. Snow fell again, light this time, not in flurries, but in soft, individual flakes that landed on windows like whispers. Sarah found him first. She stepped into the room quietly, a tray of warm formula in her hands. But she stopped short at the threshold, her fingers tightening slightly on the tray. Ranger had not stirred. His body lay in the same position, but now still. His head rested gently between the pups, his breath no longer visible. There was no collapse, no pain written into his limbs. Just a final stillness. Sarah did not cry. She walked in, set the tray aside, and kneeled beside him. She laid a hand on his side and whispered, "You did it, old boy. You kept your promise." Emily arrived minutes later. She stood at the edge of the glass for a long time before entering. Then she crouched beside Sarah and reached out to brush the snow-flecked fur from Ranger's eyes. Birch stirred, waking first. He sniffed the air, blinked, then curled tighter into Ranger's chest. Wren opened her eyes slowly, looked up, and then leaned into her father one last time. That evening, Emily published her article. It was read over 3 million times within a week, shared by animal rights groups, veteran networks, parenting blogs. One woman wrote, "I read this with my hand on my dog's back, and by the end, we were both in tears." A fire chief from Oregon wrote simply, "This reminded me why I joined." But the comment that lingered most came from a child. He didn't leave them. He waited until they didn't need him to stay. Spring arrived late that year, as if time itself had slowed in reverence for the quiet grief and gentle hope that lingered over Timber Hollow. When the snow finally melted, it revealed more than just bare soil. It uncovered footprints, impressions in the earth where Ranger had once walked, lay, and breathed. The wind seemed softer now, the silence more sacred. By April, Birch and Wren had grown enough to begin their transition to the haven of Ranger, the sanctuary Thomas had built with quiet persistence and unwavering vision. Located just outside the town's north ridge, the sanctuary spanned several acres of semi-wild forest, fenced, protected, but left as untouched as possible. It was a space designed not for domestication, but for dignity. A place for dogs who had known the wild and carried it in their bones. Birch had grown tall and lanky, his legs slightly too long for his still clumsy coordination. His white forehead streak had become more defined, and his ears now stood tall with confidence. Wren remained smaller, but her coat had deepened into a rich russet gold, and her eyes had developed an expression beyond her months curious but cautious, with a calm that settled over her like fog before dawn. The transfer day was simple. No ceremony, no farewell speeches. Just 2 pups in a padded van, driven slowly by Sarah Jennings herself, her hands steady on the wheel, though her throat tightened each time she glanced in the mirror at the pair sleeping side by side. The sanctuary greeted them with birdsong. Real birds, robins, mourning doves, the occasional kestrel overhead, sounding out across the young trees and new grass. The handlers, 2 women named Casey and Ray, stood waiting at the open gate. Casey, a tall woman in her 30s with ash-blonde hair and sun-weathered skin, had a gentle drawl and a habit of kneeling when she spoke to animals, as if refusing to look down on them. Ray, younger, with chestnut curls and a face freckled like pollen, moved with unshakable patience, rarely speaking unless it was to hum under her breath. Together, they had fostered over 60 dogs in their careers, but Birch and Wren were different. Everyone knew that. At the far western corner of the sanctuary stood a large, flat stone, naturally smoothed by time. Embedded in its surface was a single bronze impression, a paw print deep, strong, unmistakable. Ranger's. Thomas had overseen the casting himself. When asked why he insisted on using real metal, he said, "Because some things deserve to outlast weather." Birch found the stone first. On their second day, he dashed toward the corner while chasing a leaf and stopped short when he reached it. He sniffed. Then he pressed one paw gently into the print. It didn't fit, not yet, but he tried. Wren came up beside him and sat down quietly. They stayed like that for nearly half an hour, unmoving, staring west toward the horizon. When the handlers approached, the pups didn't turn. The staff understood. They turned away. That routine became ritual. Every evening, just before sunset, Birch and Wren would return to that stone. Some days they sat. Other days they lay pressed together, eyes closed. Occasionally, Wren would lift her snout and let out a single, soft whine, not mournful, not lonely, just remembering. Emily visited for the first time in May. She had changed not drastically, but meaningfully. Her hair had grown longer, tied in a low braid now. Her clothing, once rugged and academic, had softened earth-tone dresses layered with utility jackets. Her eyes, however, had stayed the same, thoughtful, still, lit from somewhere far within. She was now a full-time conservation educator, having joined a regional wildlife foundation. But more than that, she had become a storyteller, one who bridged the cold lines of research with the warm, beating truths of lived experience. Every spring, she brought students to the sanctuary, middle schoolers, high schoolers, even a few veterans' families. She would lead them through the pine trails, pausing at the stream or the quiet dens until they reached the bronze paw print beneath the cottonwood tree. There, she would kneel, place a hand on the stone, and say only, "This is where someone chose love over fear." The rest she left to the wind. The story of Ranger had become legend in Timber Hollow, passed through whispers in coffee shops, painted on the walls of the veterinary clinic, and tucked inside bedtime books written by local artists. But to Emily, it was never about the fame. It was about memory and legacy. She often sat with Thomas in the sanctuary's outdoor rest area, a circle of benches built from reclaimed barnwood. He had aged more in the last year, his beard whiter, his shoulders slightly stooped. But his eyes remained sharp, especially when watching Birch and Wren race across the meadow. "They'll outgrow even this place someday," he said once. Emily nodded, "But they'll come back to the stone." He smiled, slow and small. "That's all we can hope for." As summer approached, the sanctuary flourished. New dogs arrived, some limping from injury, others skittish from past harm. But they all found some piece of peace in that place. And every single one, without fail, visited the bronze paw print at least once. Sarah, who now helped coordinate training retreats for wildlife rescue techs, swore it wasn't planned. They just find it, she'd say, like it's calling to them. Wren, who had grown quieter, more observant, began to take on the role of watcher. When new pups arrived, it was often she who approached first tail low, head tilted, gaze steady. Birch remained the wild one, bounding through brambles and barking at hawks, but he always circled back to her, and together they always returned to the stone, at dusk, without fail. Sometimes the greatest love doesn't roar, it simply stays. Ranger didn't have a voice to explain his pain or his past, but through every quiet act, he reminded us of something sacred, that choosing to protect, to remain, to love even when it hurts, is nothing short of a miracle. Maybe that's what grace looks like in our everyday lives, a gentle presence that doesn't seek praise, but still saves. Just like Ranger, there are unseen angels all around us, parents, friends, even strangers who stay by our side through the hardest seasons. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts. And if you believe, as we do, that God sends love through even the quietest creatures, type Amen below. May He bless you and those you love with peace that never fades.